remember, like Bob Clark and Doug Campbell, they actually devoted a show. What was it called? The Lives of Fletcher
Yeah, the
Project?
Lives of Fletcher Party. What a
Right.
joke.
Yeah.
What an embarrassment. I mean, those.
Everything is going to hell down here in Texas.
Oh yeah, man! I tell you what. Every time I hear this song, I'm so tempted to let it run out its 3-minute course. But uh, love it. Once again, thank you to Shepherd of Fire and my buddy Roger for this awesome theme music that you hear every week, exclusively right here on the Lone Gunman Podcast. That's right, man. Gets me fired up to do episodes. I love it. Anyway, welcome into the show. This is the Lone Gunman Podcast. This is episode number 249er. That's right. We are deep into it, folks. And we are approaching the 60th anniversary. Every day we get closer. And we are approaching it. We're about, what are we? 2.5 months out, so something like that. Very excited for all of that, for sure. Also, big plug, personal and professional, because I have a lot of friends who will be presenting at JFK Lancer 27th annual Lancer November in Dallas conference this year for the 60th anniversary. It goes on from November 17th through the 19th of this year of our Lord 2023 at the Lorenzo Hotel in Dallas, Texas. If you can't get there in person, you can watch virtually at assassinationconference.com. Register online at JFK Lancer Productions, or I'm sorry, let me get this right. JFK Lancer Publications to register and your ticket options. Some of my friends, who I know personally, that will be speaking there this year include such notable names as Alan Dale, Bill Simpich, David Boylan, John Newman, Alex Harris, Doug Campbell. I know that guy. Hey, I know that guy. Johnny Cairns, Monica Perez Jimenez, Carmine Savastano, Old Larry Hancock, Stu Wexler, Bart Camp, Chuck Ocelli, me and Joe Borelli, Robert Groden, and many, many more. So make sure you are either there in person or you are virtually there in spirit. You won't want to miss it. All right, so before we get into the show, let us hear a word from our fine and delicious, savory and smooth sponsors of the show, Silk City Hot Sauce. Bob, take it away. Big Bad Bob here with you for Silk City Hot Sauces. Why Silk City? Because this hot sauce comes to you directly from Patterson, New Jersey, also known as Silk City. These hot sauces are 100% natural, gluten-free, vegan, contain no chemicals, fillers, dyes, or junk. Everything is packed into recyclable glass containers because glass doesn't leach weird flavors into the product. All other hot sauces are sourced in small batches from locally bought fresh peppers. It's all about the pepper, people. Telling you. Your boy, Big Bad Bob, loves his food like he loves his women. Hot and spicy, but not so hot you can't eat them. So, if you love yourself some sauce and you're tired of trying to transform your bland meat into something edible, with the tip of a jar, you will transform your life forever. Head over to silkcityhotsauce.com, place an order, and upon checkout, enter the code GUNMAN, that's GUNMAN, for 20% off of your entire order. You won't regret it. Thank me later. Peace. Well, I will thank you right now, Bob. Thank you for that wonderful word from our sponsor. People, get to silkcityhotsauce.com and get some damn hot sauce and support the show that you love so much. This one right here. Right here. That's right. All right, let's get into the show. First off, we're going to be talking about Rudolph Richard Davis Jr., who I believe kind of came into the radar of the Garrison investigation, which kind of piqued the interest of the FBI as well. So, on July 17th, 1967, Rudolph Richard Davis Jr., who resides at 2901 Briarhurst, Apartment 31, furnished the following information. Davis has at no time had any association with any organization known as the Minutemen, and to his knowledge, he has never known anyone who was associated with that organization. Bullshit. Sorry, I had something. Davis has no information regarding any association with any Minutemen organization on the part of Lee Harvey Oswald either. Bullshit. Huh. Sorry. Man. Sorry, I got the sneezies. Davis, in the fall of 1963, met Lee Harvey Oswald on 2 occasions in New Orleans, Louisiana, in connection with anti-Castro activities in which Davis was active at the time in the New Orleans area. So says he. In connection with these meetings with Lee Harvey Oswald, Davis stated that he met Oswald at the time that Oswald was passing out pro-Castro leaflets on Canal Street. Now, hold on, folks. I keep, and maybe it's because I'm looking into something else at the time, but I see and read about so many people who was either there or they saw or they watched or they filmed or they heard about this street fracas on Canal Street between Oswald and Bernier. You know, like it's the 1:00 game on Sunday. It's the place to be. Get your ass down to Canal Street, folks. We're going to see the standoff between the pro-Castro and anti-Castro on one side, and we're going to get it on. Like it's the rumble in the jungle. I don't know. But apparently, Rudolph Richard Davis saw it as well. Let's see. Davis contacted Oswald at Oswald's apartment in New Orleans in an effort to obtain information concerning Oswald's pro-Castro activities. At that time, Oswald refused to have anything to do with Davis. So, this is interesting. So we have Carlos Quiroga going to Oswald's apartment and talking to him about his pro-Castro activities. We have Rudolph Richard Davis, going to Oswald's apartment. But if you remember, Oswald, when he handed these leaflets out, was putting on there the address of 4907 Magazine Street, which is kind of where he lived. He actually lived, I think it was 4905, which was a little apartment off to the side of the main residence. But yeah, why you would put your uh personal address on flyer for anybody to come is beyond me. But okay. It says Davis was born September 9th. Hey, that's today when I'm recording this. Well, happy birthday, Rudolph Richard Davis. Uh, might be still alive. He was born in 1934. That would make him 89 years old. He might still be alive. So, well, if you are and you're out there, buddy, uh, happy birthday. Like I said, born September 9th, 1934 in New York. New York! At the age of 2, he moved to Cuba from New York with his parents as his father owned a sugar mill in Cuba. Davis left Cuba in January 1961, entering the United States on January the 31st, 1961, at Miami, Florida. He proceeded to New York City, where he worked as a sugar broker. A sugar broker. A sugar broker. He remained in New York City until October 61, when he moved to New Orleans, Louisiana, to join his parents and sister, who were residing there already. Shortly after his arrival at New Orleans, he became associated with an anti-Castro group. Davis was then employed as an insurance salesman. And that's it for this FBI report, taken by Special Agents James Weir and Donald Steenmeyer in Houston, Texas on July 17, 1967, folks. But that's not the end of the story. No. Because he also alleges something else. And what could that be? Well, here we go. All right. In March of 1968, the FBI was investigating a company by the name of Guatemala Lumber and Mineral Corporation. Okay. Why, you ask? Well, I'll tell you. Information which you have furnished concerning the investigation. Now, this is a memorandum directly to the director of the Federal Bureau of Investigation by J. Walter Yeagley, Assistant Attorney General of the Internal Security Division. So, and this is marked confidential all over it, folks. So here we go. Information which you have furnished concerning the investigation being conducted by New Orleans DA James Garrison in connection with the assassination of President Kennedy indicates that Garrison has shown an interest in a Cuban refugee training camp near New Orleans, which was operated by Richard Rudolph Davis in the summer of 63. So not only did he move there in 61 to be there close to his parents and sisters, but by 1963, he is training Cuban refugees in guerrilla tactics in the swamps of Louisiana. Garrison reportedly believes that some of these individuals affiliated with the camp were involved in the assassination of President Kennedy, and that Lee Harvey Oswald was at that camp. We note that your investigation of the assassination disclosed no information indicating that Oswald had any contact with Davis or the anti-Castro organization which Davis represented in New Orleans, the Movimiento Democrático Cristiano, and that data concerning an alleged training camp, including a report of an October 1st, 1963 interview with Davis, was disseminated to the Warren Commission. During this interview, Davis advised that in early 63, he made friends with persons in the lumber business in Guatemala, with whom he formed a Louisiana corporation called the Guatemala Lumber and Mineral Corporation and served as its vice president. Davis said that in the summer of 63, some 19 men were recruited from Miami through a representative of the Movimiento Democrático Cristiano for the purpose of being trained in this lumber cutting operation. He added that when the men learned they were to work in a lumber industry and were not recruited for a military operation, they became disenchanted and returned to Miami. So this is the cover story, folks. They bring in all these anti-Castro Cubans in to Louisiana, telling them, "Hey, we're going to train you in guerrilla warfare. Oh, by the way, cut down all these trees, if you will, too, as well." And they said, "No, no, we're not working. We want to be trained. We're not working." Davis gave a somewhat different account of the origins of the training camp during a subsequent interview on July the 14th, 67, set forth in a Bureau memorandum at Houston, Texas, which we just read from. Blah, blah, blah. He stated that he set up a training site for exiled Cubans on the De La Barre estate in Lacombe, Louisiana, with the assistance of John Birch Society members and occasionally afforded prominent and wealthy John Birch Society members a demonstration of the, quote, training activities, after which he would receive a financial contribution for the training program. Davis also stated in this interview that he met Lee Harvey Oswald on 2 occasions in 1963. Once while Oswald was passing out literature on the street, which we talked about, and another time at Oswald's apartment, during which he attempted without success to obtain information about Oswald's pro-Cuban activities. Davis claimed that he had refused to discuss his activities with Garrison's investigators, but admitted that in approximately March of 67, he was paid $500, which was a lot of money at the time, by Time Life magazine to show reporters the training site and that 190 photographs were taken for an article on the Garrison probe. We are aware from earlier information which you have furnished concerning Davis that he has been variously described as a, quote, promoter and a hustler who will do anything for money and is often carried away with his own thinking. However, in view of his somewhat conflicting statements about the origins of his training camp, we would appreciate receiving any additional information you may have in your files concerning the Guatemala Lumber and Mineral Corporation and its other officers with whom Davis claims to be associated. In this connection, attached is a copy of the Articles of Incorporation of the corporation, which we obtained from the Office of the Secretary of State of Louisiana. The officers listed on page 6 are substantially the same as those mentioned by Davis in his October the 1st, 1963 interview with the Bureau, and are as follows. Joseph R. Miller, president and director of this company, 3305 Palmyra Street, New Orleans, Louisiana. Rudolph Richard Davis Jr., vice president and director, 2001 Canal Street, New Orleans, Louisiana. Gus J. Labar, vice president and director, 710 the Pere Marquette Building, which is interesting, folks. That is the same building in which G. Ray Gill had an office, and I believe Eugene Hale Brading had an office, and possibly David Ferry. I'm not 100% on that. And his brother F.D.V. De La Barre, who was the secretary and treasurer, and his office is with his brothers at 710 Pere Marquette Building, New Orleans, Louisiana. With regard to Joseph R. Miller, departmental files contain a bureau report of Special Agent Warren DeBreeze, dated March 16, 1959, captioned Unsub, Nicaraguan Male, Unsub, a.k.a. J. Miller Jr., Export Manager, Absent Enterprises, Dr. Albert Aparicio, Internal Security, Nicaragua, Registration, J. Miller Jr., who described himself as export manager of the Absent Enterprises, P.O. Box 187, New Orleans, requested price quotations on a large quantity of various war surplus goods from Rollins, Inc. in New Orleans. Information from the Immigration and Naturalization Service file of one Jose Roberto Milla, alien registration number 6014222, born February 7th, 1910. Hey, that's my birthday. February, not 1910, but February 7th. In Guatemala City, Guatemala, is also set forth in this report, but it was not definitely established that he was identical with the individual who had requested the price quotes. Well, so what kind of place was this? Was this some kind of front who was aiding and abetting these anti-Castro raids? All right, we got here the articles of incorporation for the company, and they are all dutifully signed and notarized by a public officer. Now, interestingly enough, Gus J. Labar, right, one of the brothers who have an office in the Pere Marquette building, who are also in business together with Richard Ricardo, whatever his name is, Davis, has an interesting rap sheet. Uh, United States Department of Justice, FBI, or Federal Bureau of Investigation. The following FBI record is furnished for official use only. Information shown on this ID record represents data furnished to the FBI by fingerprint contributors, where final disposition is not shown for further explanation of charge is desired. Communicate with the agency contributing those fingerprints. Now, so this is basically a fingerprint file. So the first, and there's two entries on here. So in 1954, they have Gustav Joseph Labar Jr.'s fingerprints. They received them from the Army. He was discharged from the Army November the 1st, 1954, as a G2. The next place that the FBI received fingerprints from Gustav J. Labar Jr. is from the police department in New Orleans, Louisiana. And this was on May the 20th, 1958, and you're going to love this. For exposing another person to his penis. Yeah. Now, I think that's what it means. Because I'll tell you exactly what it says. Exposing his person to with his penis. I'm guessing that he took it out and shook it at somebody at some point. Maybe scared an old lady or child with it. Who knows? But that's where they got their second set of fingerprints from the New Orleans PD. Lots of good, wholesome folks in New Orleans back then, people. I'll tell you what. And just to put a neat little bow on this, before we get into our next wholesome New Orleans resident, I'm not 100% sure that this Rudolph Richard Davis is not the same Richard or Ricardo Davis who worked as a part-time investigator for Dean Andrews. Because as you remember, folks, Dean Andrews also saw the street fracas on Canal Street with Oswald and Bernier and all that jazz. And also knew Oswald because he had been in his office inquiring about his discharge and his something about his wife uh, becoming a citizen or something. So very interesting stuff there. I'm not sure it's the same fella, but they got the same name and they saw the same things at the same time. So it definitely could be. Could be. All right, next up, we're gonna get into uh, a fella by the name of Dante Maraschini, the big cherry on top, folks. Or maybe it was the bottom. Who knows? Oh, sorry. All right. Well, apparently, by the time of the HSCA, they could not find the man himself, the big cherry on top or the bottom, whichever you want. In 1978. So investigator Robert Burris uh, served a fellow by the name of William T. Andrus a summons for all records of an ex-employee named Dante Maraschini. On the above date, Mr. Andrus gave the Select Committee 84 pages of records regarding this individual. A copy of the original summons attached to this report. So what did this outside contact report from May the 2nd, 1978 say? Well, I will tell you. On Tuesday, May the 2nd, 1978, at approximately 4 p.m., investigator Robert Burris received 84 Xerox pages of employee records of Mr. Dante Maraschini, a white male born February 28, 1925, in Brooklyn, New York, Social Security number, described as 5'6", 1,000. I'm sorry, 143 pounds soaking wet, dark eyes and hair, bony face, and stained teeth. Stained by what? Well, I'll let you use your imagination there, folks. Present address and employment unknown. The records were supplied by Mr. Andrus, who's the personnel director for Chrysler Michaud. The investigator also spoke with Mr. Robert Taylor, a security officer for the Chrysler Michaud Corporation, regarding his knowledge of Mr. Maraschini. Mr. Maraschini first applied for a job at Chrysler on October the 3rd, 1962. He was interviewed by Mr. Taylor on March 6, 1963, and hired on August 26, 1963. His employment was terminated when the defense contract ran out on March 1st, 1968. Recommended follow-up, attempt to locate this guy and interview him. Well, didn't go too well. But, so, now the interesting part of all this, folks, put it into some context for you. Dante Maraschini worked at Riley Coffee Company at the same time that Lee Harvey Oswald was there. He also either lived next door to or right down the street from Clay Shaw on Dauphine Street. And he was also good friends with David Ferry. And of course, we know the CIA connections between Riley Coffee Company and its owner, William Riley, and his anti-Castro activities. And it seems like a lot of his employees ended up getting hired by this NASA Chrysler missile complex in Michaud. But we'll get there, I promise. So his position there was entitled was Planning and Specifications Man, which consisted of maintaining records and ordering materials and recording their usage. His work was satisfactory, and he received pay raises as they came due. He made numerous oral and written complaints that he was not being promoted to a higher position. because of personality conflicts with his immediate supervisors. He states in one letter that he has been victimized by his supervisors. He did not receive any promotions that he requested in the later years that he worked for Chrysler. However, he was written an offer of another position in 1972, but his letter was returned to the company for lack of a forwarding address. Maraschini's supervisor was a Mr. John O'Neill, who is now retired and living in Slidell, Louisiana. Maraschini lists his previous employment from 49 through 64 when he is hired by Michaud. In his employment, he lists the William B. Riley Coffee Company, New Orleans, Louisiana. The Standard Coffee Company, New Orleans, Louisiana, from 3/19/63 to 6/10/63 as a salesman. This company is a part of William Riley Coffee Company, where Lee Harvey Oswald worked from May 10th of 63 to July 1963. Maraschini also worked at Arnaud's restaurant in the French Quarter from June 10th, 63 to August 25th, 63. This restaurant is the same one that Kerry Thornley worked at from October to November of 63, at which time he was working on his book about Oswald. Thornley states this in his affidavit to Jim Garrison. In the Select Committee's copy of the Federal Aviation Agency hearings of David Ferry, Dante Maraschini is mentioned as being used as an interpreter for an Italian educational certificate from, quote, the University of Phoenix, Bari, Italy, which stated that Ferry has a PhD. So this guy is the reason David Ferry is called Dr. David Ferry. Thanks, Dante Maraschini, for that. For this course that he interpreted, I'm sure painstakingly, from Italian into English for David Ferry, so that he can become a doctor. The University of Phoenix. This university was investigated by Tolan Investigations, Inc. for the FAA and believed to be a mail-order university. No shit. Maraschini, enlisting his educational background, stated that he attended the Magistral High School and Magistral Superior College in Bari, Italy. Mr. Maraschini stated that he would get a transcript of his credits from Bari, Italy, but he never did. No security check was made on Maraschini at Michaud because he did not have access to confidential material. And a Southern Research File number 11N224, dated December 1962, received by investigators Buras and Delsa from Joseph Oster, president of Industrial Securities of Monroe, Louisiana, a surveillance report of 11/16/62 reports the following. Okay. Mr. Jack Oliphant records an auto license number that comes to Ferry's address, 3330 Louisiana Avenue Parkway, as 190-718, a Louisiana license which was registered to Dante Maraschini on a 1951 Pontiac, who resided at the time at 1309 Dauphine Street. This address is located right next door to Mr. Clay Shaw's house. 1309 Dauphine Street is mentioned by Maraschini when filling out a background check of references. The references given are James Llewellyn, who lived at 1309 Dauphine Street, Gertrude Harrison, 1309 Dauphine Street, Pat Patterson, legendary wrestler. No, well, it might be. Shit. Pat Patterson, 3319 Sergeant Drive, Charlotte, North Carolina. Dr. and Mrs. Irving Redler, Betts Place, Metairie, Louisiana, and Albert Farrow of Loyola Avenue, New Orleans, Louisiana. Mr. Robert Taylor, security officer, stated that he saw Maraschini one time as he left Michaud and he was working at the Monteleone Hotel in New Orleans as well. Mr. William Monteleone was the organizer of large donors in New Orleans for money contributed to anti-Castro Cubans. This comes from the New Orleans States item of July 20th, 67. Dante Maraschini, an early witness in the probe of District Attorney Jim Garrison of the assassination of President Kennedy, was arrested here today on a bad check warrant from Shelby, North Carolina. Maraschini said he did not remember the check transaction in question. Assistant DA James Alcock said the arrest had absolutely nothing to do with the assassination probe. Alcock theorized that the North Carolina authorities spotted Maraschini's name and picture in the papers after his appearance as a witness, and that this is probably the reason for the arrest after such a long period of time, since 1961. A warrant for the Michaud Space Plant workers' arrest was sent from the sheriff of Cleveland County, North Carolina, to Frank Mallock, a detective in Garrison's office, who turned it over to criminal sheriff Louis Hay Jr. The warrant charges in 61, Maraschini wrote a check for $113 payable to L.P. Money of Route 3, Lonsdale, North Carolina. The warrant stated that the check drawn on the Union Trust Company of Shelby was not backed up by sufficient bank funds. Maraschini said in November of 61 he had worked in the Shelby area in the housing contracting business. In March of 67, Maraschini appeared in Garrison's office shortly after the arrest of Clay Shaw, who has been indicted in the alleged conspiracy to kill Kennedy. Maraschini's connections with the case has never been made clear, although he was reportedly a friend and neighbor of Shaw. Maraschini, who would not discuss the probe today, said he is a native of Brooklyn, born of Italian parents. He indicated that he was in favor of the Garrison investigation and would not condemn it. In declining to comment on the probe, Maraschini said, "We cannot add gasoline or water or anything that might either excite or cool interest in the investigation." Maraschini, when he appeared in Garrison's office, told reporters, "I don't know what this thing is all about." Sure you don't, buddy. Sure you don't. District Attorney Jim Garrison was reported today seeking a possible connection between Lee Harvey Oswald, the accused assassin of President John F. Kennedy, and a group of men involved in a 1963 raid on a munitions cache in Lacombe, Louisiana. The report came after Dante Maraschini, age 42, the fourth man subpoenaed in Garrison's probe of the alleged plot, spent 90 minutes in the district attorney's office yesterday. "I don't know what this darn thing is all about," Maraschini told newsmen as he entered Garrison's office. When he emerged, a crowd of newsmen pursued him. He ran away, shouting, "What the heck? I know the freedom of press, but this?" Ugh. Maraschini works as a planning and specifications man at the Chrysler Michaud Missile Complex manufacturing plant here in Michaud, Louisiana. The first report of Garrison's interest from the ammunition seizure came from WDSU, which said it had been informed by reliable sources that he was trying to trace the identity of at least one American, not Oswald, who was believed to have been in the group. Among the items seized in the raid of July 31st, 1963, at an unoccupied house in Lacombe, about 20 miles north of here, were 20 empty 100-pound bomb casings, 48 cases of dynamite, napalm, and firing caps. The FBI said the explosives were designed for use by persons planning a, quote, military operation against a foreign country with which the United States is at peace. The FBI identified the owner of the house as William Julius Malancey of New Orleans His wife was quoted in an interview as saying the house had been loaned to a Cuban exile friend she knew only as Jose Suarez. Jose Juarez. She said she and her husband had lived in Cuba until 1960 and moved to New Orleans because Castro had made things impossible down there. Mrs. McClancy was asked last night if Garrison's investigators or anyone else had contacted her about the incident. She replied no to both questions and refused to say anything further. Maraschini and Oswald once were employed here at the same time by the same coffee manufacturer, though in plants a block apart, records show. Oswald was an employee of the William Riley Coffee Plant, and Maraschini worked that summer at the Standard Coffee Company. Both firms were owned by William B. Riley. Maraschini lives in a middle-class residential area near Lake Pontchartrain. He speaks with a slight accent. He was born in Brooklyn and educated in Italy. He told newsmen he once operated a bar called Dante's Inferno. Sounds hot in there. In the French Quarter. Come on down to Dante's Inferno, baby. I'm sure Clay Shaw will be there. Yeah. 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 All right. So. Okay. Dateline. December the 19th, 1962. A surveillance was maintained at David Ferry's residence from 5:30 p.m. to 11:30 p.m. on Friday, November 16th, 1962. David Ferry came home at about 7:15 by himself and went into his house. At 8:15 p.m., Ferry and two men, who appeared to be about his own age, walked away from Ferry's home and got into an automobile with 1962 Louisiana license 190-718. They had been instructed to record activity at the house and not to follow cars away from the house, since it was believed more important to determine who came to see him. This car came back at 11 p.m., and Ferry got out and went into his house. There was no further activity. 1962 license 190-17 is issued to one Dante Maraschini of 1309 Dauphine Street for a 1951 Pontiac. The following investigation was conducted by Edward M. Davis. On November 17, 1962, the following observations were made at 3330 Louisiana Parkway, New Orleans, Louisiana. The observation commenced at approximately 6:30 p.m. At this time, the subject's automobile was absent from in front of the above address. At 7:30 p.m., subject arrived in the above automobile alone. He parked in front of the 3330 Louisiana Avenue Parkway and entered the house. At 8:25 p.m., a 1954 Ford Tudor sedan bearing 1962 Louisiana license 311-641 with three boys in the car arrived in front of the subject's home. They parked the car and all entered the home at 3330 Louisiana Avenue Parkway. Shortly thereafter, two of the boys left the subject's home and walked in the direction of South Broad. The driver of this car is approximately 18 years of age, 6 feet tall, slender, with brown hair. He was wearing an orange-colored short-sleeved shirt and dark-colored slacks. The second boy was approximately 16 years of age, 5 foot 8 inches tall, a medium build, dark brown hair with a high wavy front. He was wearing a plaid shirt with dark slacks. The third boy was approximately 15 years of age, slender, 5 foot 6 inches tall, a fair complexion, light brown hair, and was wearing light tan slacks and a light blue shirt. The latter two boys were the ones that left and walked towards South Broad. They returned at 9:20 p.m. and entered the Ford with Louisiana license 311-641. At approximately 9:35 p.m., the driver of the car left subject's home and returned to the above car with the two boys therein and departed driving to South Broad. They parked at a bus stop near Broadmoor Drug Store on the corner of South Broad and Washington Streets. The second boy left the car and entered the drugstore. After a few minutes, he returned to the car and they left, driving north on Broad Street. The observation continued at 3330 Louisiana Avenue Parkway until 11 p.m. Subject had no other visitors during the above period. So, it appears that Dante Maraschini is friends of David Ferry and also enjoys the company of young boys, as does David Ferry. And oh, by the way, did I mention that at the time Dante Maraschini is married with children? Yeah, that part. All right, well, that's it for the big cherry on top, or the bottom, if you will. The Dante Maraschini, with all these crazy connections between Clay Shaw, David Ferry, Oswald. But apparently this guy is just oblivious to everything. Even though he was into what David Ferry was into, he's responsible for making him a doctor, Dr. David Ferry. So yeah, this guy's got some very interesting stuff going on with him, and was the fourth person uh, subpoenaed by Clay or Jim Garrison. So, I mean, he even worked at the same restaurant Carrie Thornley was at in New Orleans at the same time he's writing a book about Oswald. The connections between these people in New Orleans are crazy when you get right down to it. So, why don't we get into another one? Another fine resident, fine, upstanding, wholesome resident of New Orleans named Leander Davy. Oh, here we go. All right. We have another HSCA interview. This time, like I said, with Leander Davy at the Patio Motel, room number 65. So he was living large at the time, or he might have just been staying at the Patio Motel, room number 65 in 1977. Who knows? Anyway, this guy was born January 26, 1920 and 4. 5'10", 180 pounds. Air Force, retired in 1960 after 20 years. Is that right? Yeah, I guess so. Um, his mother's name is Mrs. Davy, of 890 East Sandow Street in Opelousas, Louisiana. Claims to have no arrests or convictions in his past. Somehow I doubt that. On Saturday, December 16th, 1977, at approximately 10 a.m., investigators Bob Burris and Lawrence L.J. Delsa met Leander Davy at the Greyhound bus station in New Orleans, Louisiana. Mr. Davy was interviewed that day in room 65 of the Patio Motel located on Tulane Avenue in New Orleans. Mr. Davy was shown approximately 60 photographs and asked to identify those that he knew. He identified the following photographs as people that seemed familiar to him, but he can't remember anything specific about. These include Rendito Rashanti, Miguel Mariano Cruz, Roy Hargraves. There's a name we know. Gordon Deville, another name we know. John Meadows, William Brady, Norberto Fernandez, Leonard Wall, Florencio Villaria, and Roberto Cortez. Couldn't tell you about any of them other guys. The following people were identified by photograph that Mr. Davy positively remembered as having seen around the Court of Two Sisters restaurant located at 613 Royal Street, New Orleans, Louisiana. This restaurant and bar has an entrance in the 600 block of Bourbon Street. Also, Mr. Davy worked as a doorman at this entrance from 1961 to 63. The people he identified were Harold B. Sandoz Jr., couldn't tell you. Jose Mayoral Pepe, nope. David Ferry, hey, there's a name we know. Sergio Arcacha Smith, ding, ding, ding. Thomas freaking Beckham, man. Clay Shaw, Lawrence Howard, Fred Lee Crispin, Jack Ruby. Okay. Mr. Davy also knows Mr. Eugene Davis, but the investigators did not have a photograph of him at this time. Mr. Davy also identified Lee Harvey Oswald and the first and second tramps as having been in his company. Eugene Davis was the manager, Margaret Tannenbaum was the bookkeeper, and Nick Parno was the owner of the Court of Two Sisters. As the doorman on Bourbon Street, Mr. Davy did not see the customers in the patio or the restaurant and oyster bar. He did see people occasionally in the front bar. The restaurant goes through the entire block and was at that time and still is one of the better places to eat in the French Quarter. It is a favorite with the tourist trade which the doorman attempts to introduce to the people walking on Bourbon Street. It is not a neighborhood type bar, and very few people would just hang out in any part of the business. Anyone not dressed for an evening meal would not be allowed to come into the place. It was not a black tie affair, but people in work clothes were not allowed in. Mr. Davy worked only at night and was paid in cash by Gene Davis, $10 a night. One night, while he was working the door, a young man that he later realized was Lee Harvey Oswald came up to him and asked him if he knew where Clay Bertrand was. Davy replied that he did not know and inquired of Mrs. Margaret Tannenbaum if anyone by that name worked in the place. Gene Davis was standing nearby and told Davy that he would speak with the young man. Oswald and Davis then went into the restaurant for a while. Later, as Oswald was leaving, Davy heard Gene Davis tell a waitress, "See that young man there? He just returned from behind the Iron Curtain." That was the first time that Davy saw Oswald. He cannot put a time or date to this meeting. The second time that Davy saw Oswald was sometime near November of 1963. Davy missed Gene Davis the night before and did not get paid. He went to the court in the day sometime after noon and asked where he could find Gene Davis. A waiter told him that Gene Davis was in the storeroom. The waiter had to tell Davy how to get to the storeroom because he had never been there before. Davy went into the restaurant and up a spiral staircase onto a porch that was on the second floor of the building that ran alongside the patio where customers ate. He walked to the last two doors near the Bourbon Street side. The staircase was on the Royal Street side, and he knocked on the door, and someone said to come in. He walked into the second room from the Bourbon Street side and saw Gene Davis in the room with Oswald laying on an iron posted bed wearing black pants. What the? David Ferry was looking out of a window towards the back of the rooms. Ferry was sitting on the bed as if they had been talking and stopped when he came in. To his left was another room, and through the door he could see that it was a kitchen. And there were two army-type cots set up with covers on them as if someone was using them as beds. In this room he saw two Americans. The man he saw best looked like the photograph of the first tramp. The other man looked like the second tramp. No one except Gene talked, and he only said, "See you later." That was the only other time that he saw Oswald. Davy stated that Oswald looked, quote, different the second time. He couldn't elaborate any further on that description, but he insisted that he looked different. Well, maybe because Oswald was in Texas in November of 1963. So who was this Oswald, quote, Oswald, that he saw in a bed with Gene Davis and David Ferry? Mr. Davies stated that he had seen Ferry around there 4 or 5 more times. He usually had a Cuban guy with him when he came there. He never saw who Ferry talked to because of his position out front. He only saw him come in and leave. People come and people go. Jose Pepe Mayoral was the head waiter and now lives in Miami, Florida. Pepe was good friends with Harold Santos Jr. Mr. Davy would take Jose Mayoral and Harold Sandos around to the Cuban bars on Decatur Street, like the Havana Bar, after they got off work. The place that they would go to that he can remember best is the Casa de las Marinas, located at 601 Decatur Street. He also seems to remember the Las Americas as a place they went. It is located in the 400 block of Decatur Street. Davy didn't know many Cubans, but he says that after the Bay of Pigs invasion, a lot of them came to work at the restaurant. Davies remembers seeing Sergio Arcasha Smith, Thomas Beckham, and Clay Shaw, but never talked to them and cannot put them together into business. He identifies the photo of Fred Lee Chrisman as a man that came around almost every week during 1963, and Gene Davis used to introduce him as, quote, my daddy, in a joking manner. Wow. Chrisman said that he was from Baton Rouge. Davy did not remember the name, but he definitely recognized the face. He said that he remembers Fred Chrisman had a white car and he used to park it in the no parking zone in front of the entrance and would give Davy $4 or $5 to watch it for him. One night, a car parked in the zone with the Texas license plate, and he went to the side street and politely told the driver that this was a restricted zone. The driver unpolitely slapped him in the face and laughed at him, and then drove off. He heard the girl on the passenger side ask, "Why'd you do that, Jack?" He could not remember what the other people in the car looked like. He states that this was the only time that he saw the guy. And when he saw photos of Jack Ruby, he recognized him. Mr. Davies stated that he called Mr. Jim Garrison in 1967 and took a trip to New Orleans and told him about the above-related incidents involving Oswald and Clay Bertrand. He did not tell Mr. Garrison about the upstairs meeting because he was afraid at the time. At that time, he took a polygraph examination administered by the DA's office and passed with flying colors and would do the same again. He was not called to testify in the Clay Shaw trial, though, however. Gene Davis was named by New Orleans attorney Dean Andrews as the Clay Bertrand that called him on November 22, 1963, and asked him to represent Lee Oswald in Dallas. Then District Attorney Jim Garrison charged and convicted Dean Andrews for perjuring himself when he testified before the Orleans Parish Grand Jury for identifying Davis and Bertrand as being the same person. Dean Andrews testified before the Warren Commission and claimed not to know who the man was that retained him to represent Oswald. The owner of the Court of Two Sisters, Nick Carno, is a close associate of Carlos Marcello and is alleged to have his names on businesses in the French Quarter that are actually Marcello's. Nick Carno is presently fighting trial dates, which his attorneys have been successfully putting off since Carno was indicted by the Orleans Parish Grand Jury for murder in 1974. He shot and killed a man in the La Strada Lounge on Bourbon Street nightclub that he owned. His trial had been postponed due to his having a serious heart condition. The investigators did not talk to Nick Carno relative to this matter. The investigators talked with Eugene Davis several times during October and November of 1977. He is cordial and states that he is willing to help in the investigation. He was not interviewed, but in general conversation, he denied knowing or ever having seen Lee Harvey Oswald. He does not know anything about Clay Shaw and cannot understand why Andrews named him as Clay Bertrand. Gene Davis now owns Wanda's Bar, located at 704 Iberville Street in the French Quarter. This bar is a homosexual hangout. Eugene Davis stated that there were rooms above the Court of Two Sisters patio, but they were used as storerooms, and Nick Carno had an apartment up there that no one could use except Carno. As stated above, Gene Davis denies knowing Clay Shaw or Lee Harvey Oswald or knowing anything about their activities. He also denies knowing Jack S. Martin. In an interview with Thomas Beckham on November 8, 1977, the reporting investigators were told that Eugene Davis attended parties with Shaw, Beckham, Ferry, Martin in David Ferry's apartment. Beckham was asked to get phony degrees and certificates for Gene Davis in '63. he did and gave them to Jack Martin to give to Gene Davis. The investigators will speak with Mr. Davis further, and any additional information will be reported. And there you have, folks, Mr. Andrew Davy. So there is a bunch of fine, upstanding citizens of New Orleans just for you. You gotta love it. I mean, it's a small world after all, folks. Anyway, follow along on the socials at the Lone Gunman 7 and make sure that you are locked and loaded and subscribed to the Lone Gunman Podcast YouTube channel. And make sure you ring the little bell to get notified of any new episodes. You will get exclusive shorts. They're previews to these very episodes of the Lone Gunman Podcast. And again, you will want to be over on YouTube somewhere around the 60th anniversary. Just saying, something big might be coming your way. You never, ever know. Anyway, enjoy the sweet, savory sounds of Shepherd of Fire with the hit tune Conspiracy, which you can only hear here, folks. Sing it, Roger. Peace.